Hello, in this video we're going to look at the content of Unit 2, Activity 4. And this activity is broken up into 4 parts. So part number 1 is going to deal with commas. And I think part of the problem with commas is that there's lots of different ways to use them, and that students sometimes get confused, and they sometimes go comma happy, and they start putting commas in lots of different places where they don't belong. And so what I'd like to look at is 7 rules on how to use commas. And if you follow these 7 rules, you should have a pretty good understanding of when to use a comma. And if one of these situations does not come up, pretty much don't use a comma, and you know that you haven't overused commas. And so if we look, rule number 1 is going to talk about commas between separate independent clauses. So if you use one of the fanboys in between 2 complete sentences, you need a comma before it. So the party was over, no one wanted to leave, 2 complete sentences. We have a but in between, so we must have a comma. Okay. The second rule is that you must use a comma after clauses or phrases that introduce the main idea or clause in a sentence. So something like, before you go to bed, comma, prepare your lunch for tomorrow. So prepare your lunch for tomorrow is the main idea or the main clause of the sentence. Before you go to bed is setting it up or introducing it. So we need a comma between the 2 clauses. The third rule is that you need commas in between clauses or phrases or words that are usually in the middle of the sentence that are not necessary. So for example, if I say, my cousin Franklin lives in Toronto, I need a comma after cousin and a comma after Franklin, because I could easily take Franklin out of the sentence and it would still make sense. My cousin lives in Toronto. Franklin is additional information that's being added into the middle of the sentence, so we need to have commas around both ends of Franklin. If you look at number 4, you have commas are used to separate 3 or more words, phrases, or clauses when they're written in a series. We could also use the word list. So if you're writing a list, so in this case, oranges, grapefruits, lemons, and limes, you want to put commas in between the different items in that list. So you'd have a comma between orange and grapefruit, you'd have a comma between grapefruit and limes, and then notice they have a comma here between the and, so lemons and limes, they have a comma here. This comma right here is becoming what we call subjective. If you look in the Windsor Star or if you look in magazines, you'll probably find they leave this comma out. I think what people are starting to find is that they think the and is strong enough to hold together the lemons and the limes, and that this comma isn't needed. So from my experience, most teachers are not going to care if you put this comma. If you put this comma, great, that's fine. If you don't put this comma, I don't think people are going to bother you about it. But this one here, between grapefruit and lemons, and this one here between oranges and grapefruit, you must put those commas. Rule number 5, you need to use a comma to indicate a pause or a shift in thought. So what we can think of with commas is commas are, the word pause is perfect there. A comma is meant to tell the reader to take a pause. So if I say, I said my brother was lazy, comma, not useless, you can kind of feel when you read that sentence that there needs to be a pause here because we're shifting to a different thought. So again, I said my brother was lazy, not useless. So there's a pause there to shift thought, so we need a comma. Rule number 6, commas are used to set off geographic names, items and dates, addresses and titles. So things like Niagara Falls, comma, Ontario, Tuesday, comma, October 31st, comma, 1989. So, of course, for dates and for geographic names, for addresses, we're always going to put in commas. And then rule number 7, you need commas to indicate a change from narrative to direct speech or a quotation. So if I say something like, Tam said, comma, I'll see you tomorrow. We need the comma here to break up the Tam said and then the dialogue. And you'll notice here when you have she answered in between two quotes here, we need commas on both ends here. Okay, that's something that when students start using quotations and dialogue, they often forget to put in the appropriate commas. I'll let you take a look down here, but here we just have ways that you don't want to use commas. So they're going to show you some wrong ways to use commas, and these are all examples of commas that I see in students' work that they're using when they're using commas incorrectly. Down here we have some practice, and so just 8 sentences. All you have to do is go through the 8 sentences and add the correct commas, and then you can click on the answer sheet to see if you got them right. Our second grammar topic for this activity is apostrophes, so another type of punctuation. And we'll talk here. Oh, looks like I'm going to have to change this a little bit here. It should say 4 ways to use apostrophes here. And so we've got 4 uses for apostrophes. You can show singular possession. So Adam's dog was sick. We have to have an apostrophe S to show that Adam is taking possession of the dog. We can show plural possession with an apostrophe. Student's homework. So there's more than one student. So this S needs to be attached to student to show that there's more than one. And then we put our apostrophe after the S. So again, students taking possession of homework. You can also use apostrophes to show missing letters in what we call contractions. So didn't. So that is did not in formal language. So we've taken out the O. We have to show that by putting in an apostrophe. And you can also show where missing numbers go in contractions. So something like pop music was great in the 80s. So we've taken out 19. So that would be 1980s, as in the decade. So if we just say the 80s, we have to show that 19 has been omitted. So those are 4 different ways to use apostrophes. Remember, I guess we can kind of narrow it down to 2. If you're showing possession, use an apostrophe. If you're using contractions, use an apostrophe. In no other cases do you have to really worry about apostrophes. Make sure you're not putting apostrophes, just like with commas, make sure you're not putting apostrophes where they don't belong. If we look down here, we've got practice questions. So again, just like the commas, just go through these 8 sentences and add apostrophes wherever they're needed, and then you can just click on the answers to see how you did. If you have any questions about commas or apostrophes, please just let me know through email. Part 3, we have point of view. And so every story has what we call a narrator. And narrators tell the story. So it's important to know who's telling the story because that impacts how the story is told. And what you'll see is that we're going to go through 3 types of point of view. First person point of view. That's when the narrator is a character in the story telling their own story. And you'll usually see the word I used in first person. And then there's 2 types of third person point of view. One type is called limited, and that means that the narrator is an observer that's watching what's happening in the story, but cannot get into the mind of any of the characters. So it's like there's someone walking around following the main characters and reporting to us, the reader, what the main characters are doing. So that would be third person limited. You also have another type of third person called omniscient. And in that case, the narrator again is not a character in the story, but this time the narrator can see into the mind of all the characters if the narrator wants to and tell us what they're thinking. Sometimes the word omniscient is used a lot to describe God. When they say God is omniscient, they mean God is all-knowing. And so the narrator in a third-person omniscient story is all-knowing. You can, if you want a little more explanation of that, and they're going to use, in this video here you can watch, and they're going to use Romeo and Juliet as an example and give it to you from 3 different points of view. You might be wondering where second person is. Well, there is no second person in storytelling. We use second person to give instructions or to give commands in other types of writing. But in storytelling, we're only worried about first and third person. All right. The second story element we're looking at in this activity is theme. And the theme, and this underline right here is a nice definition to remember. A theme is a message or lesson that the writer wants the readers to think about while they're reading the story. So every story has a theme. Most stories are going to have many themes. Essentially, it's what does the writer want you thinking about when you're reading? And so how do you find that out? Well, there's a couple questions you can ask yourself to try to determine the theme. Number one, what conflicts or problems do the characters face? What lessons do the characters learn from those conflicts or problems? And then, therefore, what messages can we take away from the story? So what we're trying to determine is what are the characters going through in the story, and what can we learn from that? What messages or lessons can we, the reader, learn from? It's important to know the difference, though, between subject and theme. So when we think of a subject, the example here of love, so there's lots of stories where the subject is love. Like romantic stories and movies, love is going to be the subject. But that's not the theme. The theme has to be something more specific. So a story needs to present a message or provide a lesson related to love in order to have a theme. And so, for example, a theme about love could be true love lasts forever. And so there's lots of romantic movies and stories that have that message, that they're trying to say that true love lasts forever. So that would be a theme. Okay? Here's a couple other themes that are pretty popular. Becoming a parent makes someone a better person. I have that a lot when my students in other classes write their own stories in narrative essays. They'll often tell me about when they became parents, they became better people. So that's a common theme. Death is inevitable is another theme. There's lots of stories that are about death, and sometimes they point out the fact that death is inevitable. So this is a little video here again. They're going to use Romeo and Juliet. If you want to take a look, you can see themes in Romeo and Juliet. All right. Lastly, this is going to be some practice. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at this short story called Overcoming Obstacles. It's a very short little story here about a teenager playing on a basketball team. And then at the bottom here, it's just going to say practice questions. And I'd just like you to identify what type of point of view is used in the story and provide specific evidence from the story to support your answer. So is this story first person? Is this story third person limited? Or is it third person omniscient? So if you need to, you can go back and take a look at the three types of point of view right here. And then just explain which point of view this is, and then give me some evidence, something from the story that proves that. And then question 2, it says, identify 2 themes in the story and provide specific evidence from the story to support your answer. So find 2 messages or lessons in this story, and then provide an explanation of proof of that theme being in the story. Okay, so what is this story? What is the writer of this story trying to get you to learn or think about? See if you can come up with 2 sentences, 2 themes, and then proof from the story that back them up. And then if you want, when you're done, you can take a look at answers to the point of view question and answers to the theme question to see how you did. And that's it for the content. Once you're done that, you can move on to the assignment.